All right. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. Who knows? Let's see if the stream actually starts. Not yet. That's like one of the things I really find sort of like really problematic with, not problematic, but like frustrating with using Restream instead of StreamYard. The lag is way longer. It's like, all right, yeah. Here we go. I can hear myself. Sounds good. Yeah, it's like almost like half a minute lag, which is a lot. Hey, Britton, how are you doing this evening? How's your reading, writing, and gaming going, my friend? I am awake. I am almost done reading The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Yeah, pretty powerful book. Also very painful and frustrating and all of that because, it's anti-colonialist and writing basically while dying of leukemia while fighting in the Algerian War of Independence certainly does not make for how can I say this very compromising texts, I guess. But yeah, I can sure see why it is such an impactful book and why it has had such a big impact on people like Malcolm X and people like Che Guevara and a lot of other people that were engaged in some form of emancipatory violence or just emancipatory struggle, I guess. I mean, not exactly violence with Malcolm X there. Yeah, and I guess that's what we all do is way too many things at the same time. But at least the writing's going good. That's good, and the gaming. So you can. Are you still in the first Spider-Man game, or have you progressed to the new one that you wanted to play? So yeah, interesting. Like generally, really interesting book, The Wretched of the Earth, because on the one hand, you have of course, you have the justification of violence in an and anti-colonial struggle, and that if you want to decolonize a country, it has to sort of go. There has to be violence because violence, colonialism is a violent practice. So the only language that colonizers understand is obviously also violence. But the analysis of what happens afterwards and how a lot of like depending on what happens, like how a decolonized country falls into neocolonialism and falls into all kinds of other struggles. I think that is a very powerful analysis and works really well. And of course, the depressing part is the psychological profiles or reports at the end with obviously Frantz Fanon was a psychiatrist and worked in Algeria during the civil war, no, War of Independence, depending on what you want to call it. And what is so interesting is that he worked in first he worked in a French psychiatric hospital and treated both French soldiers or officers of the Secret Service or whatever they were for PTSD because they had to torture Algerian freedom fighters. And turns out being the torturer can also give you PTSD and all kinds of traumatic experiences. So he treated those, and he treated the victims of torture at the same time as a psychiatrist. So yeah, you can kind of see how that guy decided to resign from his French post and join the other side in that struggle, I guess. Okay, so still on the first one. Okay. Have you ever thought about like doing, adding gaming content to your BookTube channel again? I mean, not necessarily doing like gaming videos, filming you gaming, but obviously with video games becoming more and more of an art form. I mean, I would argue they have been so for a while. Obviously, you also have like very, in very much, just basic entertainment and so forth. Have you thought about adding sort of like analysis of games to your channel as well? I mean, I know that you play a lot of it, not a lot of videos, but you do play video games, obviously. So I was wondering if that's something you thought about, like adding media analysis of video games to, books and comics and potentially movies and stuff as well. Yeah, um, yeah, that's the point. And Malcolm X, I think he does even quote the Wretched of the Earth in his autobiography, for example, because yeah, it's that important of a text in a lot of ways. And yeah, very powerful read. I had read like excerpts at university, but never the full thing. So I'm glad I did the whole thing now, and it's yeah, written by a very very angry man, understandably angry. Also, kind of makes you wonder what could have become of someone like Frantz Fanon if he hadn't died of leukemia and pneumonia in at age 36 or something, super young. Yeah, I guess like the thing is that with the sort of like the more media analysis of video games, I feel it's a field that is still relatively young. So the language I mean, hasn't sort of percolated through society. Like everyone can do booktube videos because we have sort of created a shared language of how to talk about books. And even people who may not have done years and years of research and an academic study of the terminology and so forth have like a developed language of talking about books. And they use stuff like tropes, and they use terms like world building, magic system, all of that stuff in a lot of ways. But that is available to everyone. But with sort of like a more serious analysis of video games that goes beyond looking at the graphics and going, wow, this is really cool, and the controls kind of suck. If you want to do like a deeper media analysis, that's sort of like a field that is still very much developing at the moment. And there's, obviously people who do that on, in sort of like deeper video essay kind of form, people like Jacob Geller, of course. And then there's academics writing either blogs or writing essays and papers for journals and so forth. But it's still a very young discipline. So I think it can be harder to kind of get into that because there's not as many sort of examples that you can kind of fall back on, going like, hey, this is sort of like a skeleton I can use to also build up my analysis of a video game. Or at least that's what I imagine. Obviously, I have not tried to do any media analysis of a video game because I haven't played a video game in a long time. And back then, I was not exactly thinking about media analysis in any way or form. Hey, Breaking Spines, and thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Yeah, I think like children's books are really an interesting case study there because I mean we often don't talk that much about children's books, but you read a lot of like your stuff written in the late 19th, early 20th century, and a lot of that has like for German children's books, there's a bunch of them where the stereotype of the Sinti or Romani travelers who steal children is something that comes up in a lot of those books. Obviously, they in those books obviously use the G word for those people that I'm trying to not use here. but so, but yeah, stuff like that, or the way you have like flat out racism towards black people is also something you find in a lot of these old children's books in a lot of ways, and we just never question that oftentimes. interesting about the Spider-Man thing. Um, I recently read an essay of what's his face, David Graeber's on stuff, obviously, and he was comparing Superman and or was it comparing Spider-Man and Batman, but that was about the movies at the time and looking at The Dark Knight Rises as an anti-Occupy propaganda movie and how superhero stories have sort of reached a point where they are incapable of dealing with societal problems in a meaningful way. And he was comparing Superman, not Superman, I think it was Spider-Man and Batman, but definitely Batman and so forth. But he then, talked about other stuff as well. Um, I don't think people like that necessarily hated black people a lot. It's more that a lot of these books were written in England, where you have like, or in Germany, for example, where you have far fewer black people around. So using a black person as the exotic, as the other, sort of like the mysterious, scary other, is just an easy go-to. And in a time where ideas of racism were not necessarily thought through as much. I guess a lot of people just went for that easy shortcut, and I think that's like one of the things we need to understand, or like take into account that oftentimes people don't necessarily decide to be explicitly racist, homophobic, misogynist, or anything of the sorts. But if you are working on a book and you think about one specific part that you want to get through, and you have like with children's books, it's oftentimes ideas like friendship and stuff like that, and you have your group of friends, and they are all slightly different and slightly quirky, because you understand that it's helpful for children to have that understanding that they need to be nice to friends and so forth. It's easy to sort of like just take easy stereotypes and so forth for stuff around that, because you're not exactly focusing about it, not thinking too much about the consequences. And that's just like I don't think Enid Blyton was explicitly racist against black people, but that's maybe because I never looked too deeply into what she did outside of writing those books, right? Well, yeah, but that's also a very very specific thing with that specific author. Like generally, a very troubling and problematic author, not problematic, like a an author with very with many different questionable attitudes about a lot of stuff in there. It's not just Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but it's also other books of his. I seem to remember that there was like that he was also fairly explicitly anti-Semitic in stuff that he said, but I've never looked too deeply into him because it's not. I never read any of his books as I never had any of his children's books. Interestingly enough, we read a short story in English class once. Keep forgetting what it's called. About it's a World War II short story about I think paratrooper walking through this bombed out Greek island. Yeah, exactly, Breton. Roald Dahl being a bit of an anti-Semite and a racist. And I feel like from all I remember of I ever reading about Roald Dahl, he had a weird enmity with the world, period. But the anti-Semitism was even beyond him just like hating everyone. Yeah. But yeah, that's the point. If you add that in children's books, and children take a lot of stuff just as 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 read, basically, and that's the danger there. Something I found interesting is how in Germany we had the like discourse around that with a couple of classics, children's classics that were very popular in Germany in particular. Two cases being one being the Astrid Lindgren's Pippi Longstocking's books, when her father in those stories obviously lives somewhere in the Caribbean, and rules over some tribe, is a king, pirate king, sort of there. There's like, these are books written in the 50s. You know, the thing is that in the German older translation of those books, it was always written that her father was and the German word there is basically N-word king, although, yeah, N-word king, basically. And that was changed recently into in like a newer translation, or not even, they didn't change the rest of the translation, it just changed that word to South Sea king, which understandable. And a lot of older people got really mad about how you can't change the language, this is changing the artist's work and all of that. And I'm like, nah, I don't know. I don't think that's how that works. But and then we had the same thing with a German author who wrote like a bunch of children's books. One being The Little Witch, one being The Little Merman, I think, and one is The Little Ghost, and a bunch of children's stories. And in one of those, I think it's The Little Witch. It's been obviously decades since I read those. There's a scene where they go to carnival, and people in one of the scenes are described as, how they dress up for carnival as all kinds of very clearly racial stereotypes. One kid is doing blackface, and one kid is doing yellowface, and so forth. And that scene was taken out or rewritten in a new version of the book, with the agreement of the author, who was obviously in his like 90s at the time, I think. And he said, like, well, I wouldn't write it this way today, so we can totally change that, because this was written, in the 1940s or 1950s, where we didn't think about that kind of stuff. And once again, adults, parents or grandparents, or people who I suspect don't even have children, but think that that's obviously terrible, got really upset about changing that story. And especially with children's books, I find this highly frustrating, because that's the artistic value of a children's book does rarely lie in the specific choice of words in those specific things, unless it's about poetry or whatever, right? Then we can argue that. But like, it's about the messages, it's about the story, it's not about the specific choice of words. And if the author themselves decide to change something because they're like, well, I wouldn't do that nowadays, then complaining about wokeness destroying your children's book is just ridiculous. Also, you can still get that book if you feel like it in the old prints. There are tens of thousands of them floating around, like probably millions. So who cares? Yeah, I'm aware of the Tintin thing, but I've never read the Tintin comics, so I have never gotten too deeply into that one. Yeah, but I mean, I feel like with the N-word thing in the German book, I think it is totally fine to take that out, because this is a book like 5-6 year olds get read to them or read, and you don't need to normalize N-word use for 5-year-olds, especially because you can't necessarily explain the historical context of why not to use that word outside of your one children's book to a 5-year-old. I don't think that context will land. So totally get it. I mean, it's a different thing with something like, say, Huckleberry Finn, where I think while you may have like a children's version where you keep that take those words out, I think it's important to have the original text somewhere as a historical context, because it is very much an historic document of those times. So I think it's important to keep the original somewhere available for people who want to read this for like historical reasons and so forth. The other part that I find frustrating is that we've always done this. We've always adapted stories. We've always, especially stories for children, with a lot of like books that are seen as children's books these days. A lot of them were technically, not necessarily explicitly children's books, and then they were sort of like abbreviated and, well, obviously Bowdlerized, where you take out some of the violence and take out some of the sexuality and stuff like that, right? That's something we have done since at least the early 19th century. And updating language in a lot of ways is also something we've done again and again and again, because words change. And if you want to keep something accessible to the next generation of children who don't have, the experience of like 30 years, 40 years of changing language surrounding them, you need to update the language. So I don't think it's that big of a deal in that regard, because it's something we've always done. But now we think that people are doing it out of like some nefarious political reasons, where we suddenly don't want people to use the N-word constantly. And I'm like, you know what? If that's your only concern right now, you could probably, I don't know, do something to yourself that I can't mention on YouTube. But yeah, shall we try to do the thing where we pretend to do creative work and productivity and sprints and all of that? And I'll be back around basically 5 past the hour. And I am back. How are you all doing? I hope you were successful at whatever you tried to do. Hey, Apollo, good morning. How are you doing? Yeah, I mean, yes, well, obviously the Tintin one with the Congo has the added baggage of being written by a Belgian, which doesn't necessarily make things easier. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that are important to understand, that progressive is something that means a lot of things to a lot of people at very different times. And as mentioned recently, you could be a very progressive person, socially progressive at the end of the 19th century, and also very much a big fan of eugenics, which is certainly something you would probably not call progressive in our day and age. So yeah, that's it's messy because humans are messy. Um, it may have been just a you thing, Apollo. I don't noticed it, but that would probably explain what went wrong there at some point, because I didn't get any comments either, but it didn't stay. So the problem is, of course, that I don't necessarily see that, because as long as the streaming software doesn't say that give me like a notification that the stream has broken or something of the sorts. I have no way of finding that out unless I continuously check the timer going up in the on the YouTube side of things, and that's something I mean, it's kind of difficult because what with having to use a screen reader, it means I have to explicitly go to that specific point and check again and again and again, and every time I do that, I kind of need to focus at least a little bit on that, so it's difficult. But could be that that's what happened. I wasn't aware of it. Yeah, could be that like something happened with one of the wires or something. I wouldn't know. Um, so yeah, I wasn't aware of it. Interesting. So yeah, I'm all right. I did record the weekly navel gazing yesterday, but didn't get to recording the pirate video for, well, reasons. Those mostly being uh, daylight. So I hope I will be able to do that today, so I get that one done and get get stuff going, I guess. Um, I am still reading, stuff on labor politics and things like that. Now that I have finished The Wretched of the Earth, I'm going back to Fight Like Hell: The Untold History of American Labor by Kim Kelly, which I'm very excited for. And yeah, could be. But yeah, kind of difficult to say in hindsight. But yeah, could be that I just something. Yeah, wires being wires, sometimes being a bit of a problem. So yeah, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry that happened. Yeah. So going to read the Untold History of Labor. I guess at some point in my life I really have to read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, but I haven't done so yet. Yes, it is a very powerful book, Apollo. It's certainly yeah, very powerful. And I feel like it's interesting to read the first part, and when you get to the last part where he just has the different like protocols from like the psychiatric evaluations, you realize the continuous like systemic damage something like colonialism does to the colonized, I guess, in a lot of ways that I think is often difficult to understand for people who don't live through that kind of situation. And that was certainly a powerful book, yes. Also want to read Black Skin, White Masks, but probably not right now, but maybe like next week, next month, something like that. Certainly tempted to read that one as well now that they are finally available as unabridged audiobooks. But yeah, for now, the history of labor, that's like one of those things that I found really interesting, like with the Machine Made by Terry Galway that I read yesterday. And like I said, I'm still working on this idea for like a short story or something, and it's so cool, right? You come up to you learn that the ward, the people that whose job it was to sort of provide patronage to people in specific wards in New York and solve problems, but also make sure those people show up to vote during elections. Their official title back then was ward healer, which apparently comes from like a Gaelic term, Irish Gaelic term that means something else. And well, healer, but got switched into ward healer. And if you think of it as in the sense of my current idea of like inserting service magicians into that kind of system, ward healer sounds very close to being a service magician, because providing healing is one of the things that service magicians do, and suddenly you have another connection that you can kind of just like slot into that. So that's just like really cool to see those bits and pieces come up. Or maybe that's just like my brain being weird, that I like to come up with these like weird connections and kind of tie them together. So that's something that I'm excited for with the labor history one, to get some more bits and pieces and tying that more into unions, because Machine Made mostly focuses on like the actual sort of like mechanisms of Tammany Hall, tying it to both New York City and state politics and those kind of things. And while it obviously looks at like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and looks at the sort of connections to labor politics and sort of like the beginnings of what you might call a welfare state, and like precursors to like the New Deal policies of FDR. I need more labor struggle elements and inspirations in there. So I hope that that one does in fact provide that. Fight Like Hell will provide that. There's another one on like the more crime side of things in New York in the early 20th century, where I'm considering looking at that one as well, to have like more of the organized crime connections in there. We'll see how that goes. So that's a plan for the future. Obviously, the problem with those researchers is that yeah, if you want to get all those books, they cost money, and the question is always is it a reasonable way of spending my money if nothing will come of it, except of course me reading a couple of books about labor history, which may be good enough in itself. Yeah, beyond that, I did go through comments, emails and all of that, so I can now make some more notes on the United Service Magicians of America project. So that's what I'll do during the next sprints, and then I'll get to the gym and hopefully do a pirate video later today about parody and exaggeration. And it's so frustrating. One of the things like with these books is obviously I do look if there's like academic writings on them or anything else on them, and it's obviously Google is fucked, and Goodreads is not a place where you find reasonable reviews of anything, and if there are older books, it's kind of hard to find any like serious critical assessment of anything. But with new books as well, like with Amina Al-Sirafi, I was looking at that, and there's like one longer essay kind of thing on how the inclusion of a trans character is invalidating a lot of like Muslim representation because of the idea of that being a sin and all of that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that's the kind of critical evaluation that I wanted. Yeah. And I did, in fact, actually also, try looking for academic stuff on JSTOR and places like that. So it's not just Google fucking up there. It's just like a lack of discourse in a lot of ways, and that's somewhat frustrating. And the same goes for The Pirates by George MacDonald Fraser. I guess even more so because it's from like 1983 and beyond. Maybe a review in White Dwarf or something. There's very little to find about it, which is a bit of a shame because I think there's stuff in there. So yeah, speaking of all of that, let's do the second sprint. So I'll be back shortly before 10, and then hit the bus at shortly thereafter. And I wish you all a lot of success with whatever you are planning to do during the second sprint. And I am back. How are you guys doing? Hello. Yes, Apollo. I have read After the Revolution. Last year, I think, 2 years ago. I don't know, a while ago, and I've read it. Yes, and apparently, the sequel is still in the works and takes a while, according to their Behind the Bastards Q&A over New Year's. I think he said that it's taken a while, but he has written on it. So who knows? Well, for today, I'm going to go through Fight Like Hell, and we'll see how that goes. I suspect it will have something around obviously Blair Mountain, but also Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and a couple of other important sort of like labor struggles in American history. And ideally, I'll take bits and pieces out of that, and we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I mean, he's been talking about finishing the sequel for like ever since the first one came out, but I think what with life and all the crazy shit going down, it's just taken a while. But and yeah, I like I liked it a lot as well. It's very brazen in like what it does and how it is. You know, I do appreciate that. You can tell, you can tell like what kind of books Robin Evans likes, but you can also see sort of like see a lot of like a lot of like the background he has in like both like war journalism, but like conflict journalism, but also like researching the Christian right and all of that stuff, like coming into those kind of stories in a lot of ways. So it was interesting to read it as sort of like a fictional sort of treatment of a lot of the stuff that he also deals with in his nonfiction work as a journalist and podcaster, I think. So that's certainly something. All right, I guess I'll pack my stuff and go down to the gym, and maybe you'll get a pirate video later today if I, get through that. Who knows? Life is, after all, full of surprises. So yeah, thanks for hanging out, and have a good day, everybody. Hopefully, the rest of the day will be cool. You get to do good stuff, read good books. I don't know. Don't get too much trouble from the world as a whole. So yeah, I guess I'll see you guys around somewhere, probably tomorrow.